We're again privileged to sit with Father Maximos Constas for another interview. Father, thank you for entertaining this interview.
Thank you for having me.
The question that I have for you today is, why is it that the Orthodox Church does not utilize statuary in our worship?
Yeah, that's a good question. I often hear people ask that, or they wonder why we don't have sculptures or statues in our churches. As far as I know, I think there are two or three reasons behind that. I think the first thing to say is that in the Eastern Mediterranean world, in the Greek-speaking world where Christianity had its origins, the symbol of paganism par excellence was the kind of pagan cult statue. I mean, the idol or the statue was just epitomized this whole pagan religious culture that Christianity had come into conflict with, and it represented the old world and the old order and the Roman state and so forth. So there was a kind of allergy toward sculpture being used in a religious context, primarily because it just smacked of idol worship and idolatry. So that would be, I think, one reason. I think it's also fair to say that Eastern Christian art, I mean, icons and iconography, they are striving for what we might call an idealized representation of the individual. This is not a representational art in the sense that it's not trying to reproduce something in nature. It's trying to depict kind of a, one example you might use is abstract expressionism. Right? It's not trying to depict the way people or things look in the world. It's trying to depict things like feelings or emotions or psychological states and so forth. So conceptually, it's interesting. Visually, it might not be very attractive. So icons are not out to represent anything in the world on a kind of one-to-one basis. They want to depict the individual in a kind of idealized state or in a kind of spiritualized state, which is generally true of Orthodox aesthetics in general. There's an attempt to kind of spiritualize matter or to bring out the sort of spiritual potentials within matter. That means, in the case of the icon, that the third dimension is eliminated, which means sculpture is out, and we have two-dimensional art, which is painting. So it's sort of like moving from a sphere to a circle, right? From the third dimension to the two dimensions. And there's some that I mean, nothing in most things in our world of experience are three-dimensional. So when you reduce them to two dimensions, you've abstracted them in a sense from, they've been sublimated in a sense, or spiritualized or dematerialized in a certain sense from the way physical objects look in the world. So to sum up, I mean, the shift from three-dimensional sculpture to two-dimensional painting, let's say, or mosaic or fresco, is the rejection of the memory of paganism, let's say, but also part of the church's interest in presenting the faithful with a more spiritual form of art.
Would I be right to think that one of the reasons we don't use three-dimensional statuary is because it's somehow drained of the transcendent? It somehow doesn't help achieve what we're attempting to experience in worship?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny kind of an analogy, but we're all familiar with various, let's say, cartoon characters that you see on TV, and then when someone tries to turn the cartoon character into a kind of a three-dimensional doll or a stuffed version of it, it doesn't look at all like the
Yeah.
flat image on the. So when you add the third dimension, you necessarily give the figure volume and mass and corporeality, and it begins to look like a physical object or a physical a person in the natural world. So you shift from that sort of slightly abstracted, transcendentalized, if that's a word, idealized sort of level of representation, something much more bodily, something much more corporeal. And again, I mean, in the Western Renaissance, the ideal here were antique statues, which are famous for their nudity and these sort of muscular male figures that we
Sure.
associate with
Sure.
Michelangelo. They look very carnal compared to things like Orthodox icons.
I remember visiting St. Peter's once in Rome, and seeing a very ancient statue of St. Peter in the nave and being very impressed with it. I remember kissing the feet, which was about at my mouth level, it's the closest I could get, and much of the foot was missing from decades and
Just
centuries of
worn down by
lips.
yeah.
I'm wondering about the use of statuary outside of the church temple, outside of worship. Uh, though we don't use statuary in worship, is it legitimate to have statues on church grounds, memorial statues of patron saints, and that type of thing? I've seen it often in the Russian tradition. I remember visiting in Syria the church built on the spot where the Lord Christ appeared to St. Paul on the road to Damascus. And there's a marvelous statue there, as there are in many places in Syria. The Russians have endowed these statues. Do you see that as a legitimate usage of statuary?
Well, it's important to highlight again that if we recall that icons are a liturgical art, that they figure within the liturgy and in the devotions and the worship of the faithful. A statue in a park, even if it's of a religious figure or something like that, is not normally intended for liturgical or ritual purposes. So it's in a very different context, and context is important, and intention is important. It's not being put there with the intention that people are going to venerate it. So I don't really see a problem with that. But at the same time, I would like to say that we don't have this thing where what we do in church is one thing and what we do outside the church is something else. We strive for a kind of continuity in what we do. But in the cases that you're describing, I think those are very separate kinds of things. And you go to, I know from in Greece, there are lots of towns and city squares where they have statues of bishops and saints and so forth. And they're memorials. They're not there
Yes,
for
for worship.
for veneration.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Father.
Thank you.
Patristic Nectar Publications is pleased to present the proceedings of the 2022 annual PNP conference entitled Holy Orthodoxy, Presenting the Christian Faith. This 7-lecture series is designed to present a broad exposure of the contours of the Christian faith, both to prepare inquirers and catechumens for holy baptism, as well as deepening and renewing the faith of believers. These lectures are delivered by a collage of catechists, four by the deeply respected patrologist Archimandrite Maximos Constas, with additional single lectures by Father Josiah Trenum, Father Bogdan Bucur, and Dr. Tikhon Pino. For these, as well as other conferences and available titles, please visit our website at patristicnectar.org.